Why do you think that we need to watch ourselves so much? I mean, we've always, from the beginning of recorded time, have been performing in front of each other. Why do you, I mean, look at the enthusiasm with which you recall your experience at this interpretation by Anne Bancroft, right? Why do you think we need to watch ourselves so much? Why do we need stories?
I think stories are one of the oldest ways in which we learned important things. Before there were books, before there was writing, there was an oral tradition of stories. Storytellers who could make people come alive, who could make scenes come alive. I can imagine the early cave dwellers talking about how they ran away from the bison or whatever it is that was chasing them, and how they turned around and stabbed the thing, probably exaggerating then as we do now. And I think it's an old way of learning because it combines emotion with wisdom. That's what I've tried to do in this book. I've tried to combine the emotions that stories generate with the lessons that we all need to learn.
Oh, yeah, it's really nicely put together. I enjoyed it. Very short chapters with a good setup, a very nice quote at the beginning, and then the lesson at the end. I really enjoyed reading it. You did a good job, is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
But beyond that, why do you think that we need to understand ourselves so much? Why? I mean, it implies a certain need to evolve, I guess. But why do you think that we need to watch our comportment? Like, for example, and I'll keep going. I'll go back to the example that you placed before us, which is the graduate, right? So here's a woman that wants to have the sex with the young with Dustin Hoffman's character. I forget the character's name, but Benjamin, but gets upset when Benjamin crosses an intimacy line, right? So I'm watching this, and what I realize maybe that I myself would have that reaction, and therefore I've now learned something about myself. Is that why we need to watch these stories?
Well, I think more generically, humans, like all primates, live in groups, and we need one another very much, but we also can hurt one another. And so we're constantly watching each other in order to pick up signs. Yes, everything's fine. This is going well. No, this is not going so well. Watch out for this one. Oh, that one's really a friend. And so on and so forth. And I think that by watching each other, we learn very important things that make our lives better or worse. Some people have a gift for friendship. They are capable of detecting what the other person needs and helping to provide that. And then they get repaid in turn with kindness that comes back to them. Other people have a very hard time picking up emotions, and they are isolated. Maybe they're okay with that, or maybe they're lonely. So I think that how we do in life is in some measure dependent on how well we watch each other and how well we interpret each other.
In one of the chapters of your book, you talk about how it is that we need to have people around us. And that was the chapter on kindness, right? That we to look out for the person that is not part of the group and help that person integrate into the group because it's important.
There's actual research on loneliness in the elderly, for example, that they've found that those elderly people who have more people in their lives actually live considerably longer because they have people looking at them, watching them, and offering a helping hand. And I think kindness has a huge power to soothe and heal and comfort, even when people are in a position where you can't actually fix what's going wrong. You can still hold their hand, you can still rub their back, you can still stroke their hair. And so I think that whatever it is, gestures of kindness, and I talk, for example, about the kindness of strangers. I was in the South African Defense Force as an obligatory year of service before I came to the United States. And I injured my back in basic training. And then after that, there was an exercise where you had to pair off with another person. And he hauled you across a long field on his back, and then you had to haul him back. So I paired up with somebody I thought was more or less my size. He had no problem hauling me across the field. And then when I dismounted on the other side, I took a look, and this guy must have been a bricklayer or something. Nobody lifted weights in those days. But this guy, I thought, my God, my poor back. I'm never going to be able to pick this guy up. And he just looked at me, and he immediately understood. And he said, jump back on. They'll never know the difference. And he hauled me right back across the field. Don't know who he was, never exchanged 3 words with him other than thank you. But he basically may have saved my back from being permanently injured. So little kindnesses, Blanche de Bois famously said, I've always depended, and I won't even try and mimic the Southern accent because
the kindness of strangers.
I'll sound like a South African trying to mimic a Southern accent. But she says, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. And she's not an altogether sympathetic character. She's a con artist. She's a whatever. But anyway, the reason that statement to me is so poignant is that at some point in our lives, we are all dependent or are going to be dependent on the kindness of a stranger. No matter how many friends and family we have, we sometimes just find ourselves where somebody we don't know is going to reach out and just do something kind that's going to make all the difference.
I have 2 questions that are in my mind that I want to ask, just to give you an idea of time. Of course, anything that you want to talk about, we're open. I'm open to talk about anything that you want to discuss as well. But on the subject of kindness, right? I'd like to fold that into what we were speaking about earlier, which is the self, right? And kindness to yourself and what that implies, right? That there is the id and the ego, and sort of defining what that self is and then how best to be kind to that self. Is there, generally speaking, a recipe that it can be generally applied? Or, we can jump into details if you want to. It's a fascinating subject of conversation for me.
Well, there's a huge movement these days for self-compassion. And they distinguish between compassion and kindness. Compassion is the wish that no harm will come to you, to me. The kindness is the wish that good comes to you or me. So it's a subtle shift. But I think that to be kind to oneself is important. I see a lot of people who are beating up on themselves a lot of the time, and it gets very old very quickly.
What is that beating up on yourself? What is that voice? What are that set of voices? Is it things that you've acquired, personas, defense mechanisms that you've acquired, psychological breaks or fragmentation that you've acquired throughout your life that is there and just you never addressed it? You never said, hey, we're not in the jungle anymore. I don't know. We're not being chased by a dinosaur anymore. The monster isn't coming to get us.
I would say all of the above. If we've been treated unkindly, we can internalize that voice and then treat ourselves unkindly. We kind of pick it up and somehow make it part of ourselves. And I think we can learn not to do that. There's a story in my book. One of the people who worked for us, a man named Lucas, was really like a friend to me. And a very interesting incident happened. Marijuana was highly illegal in South Africa, but it was widely grown all over. And it was called dacha over there.
Is that Afrikaans?
It must be, because that ch sound,
Yeah.
dacha. And in fact, the people would grow it. Those who were servants would often grow it. My aunt took my mother one time to show her the wonderful delphiniums growing in her backyard, and it was nothing other than a rich crop of the prized herb. And so anyway, one time a policeman comes to the door and says, my mother opens it, says, "Ma'am, your servant is selling dacha out of this house." So my mother, who was firstly very protective of anybody in the house, and secondly very assertive, said, "It's impossible. Can't be happening." "Yes, ma'am, we hear that it's coming right out of this very kitchen." They're standing in the kitchen at the time, and Lucas is nervously looking up at a box on a high shelf. And finally, the policeman twigs that maybe there's something up in that box. He says to Lucas, he says, "Boy, get down that box." So Lucas turns to him and says, "I'm not your boy. If you want that box down, you go get your own boy out of your van and get the box down." Now, of course, the idea that the policeman could have gotten it down himself wasn't even considered. Now, the kind of truculence of Lucas to say that, a black man to a white policeman in apartheid South Africa, it was almost unheard of. But in the mind of the policeman, it confirmed that there has to be dacha in the box. Gets his man from the van, gets down the box, nothing in the box other than light bulbs. The policeman realizes he's been gamed. He leaves in a huff. He says, "I'll get you. I'll come back and I'll get you next time." As he leaves with his man in tow, my mother turns around to Lucas. She says, "Where's the dacha, Lucas?" Moves the bread tin, pulls a little bag out of a hole in the wall. He's been selling dacha out of the kitchen. Anyway, that was an example of his resilience and ingenuity. But then something bad happened. We started building a swimming pool. And from that moment, Lucas was unhappy to be at our place and soon resigned. It turned out he had a phobia of water and a fear of drowning that had gone back to his childhood. And nothing could reassure him that he wouldn't have to go near the pool. Didn't make any difference. So what I learned from that is that each of us, or many of us, have some hidden fear, some battle that we're waging. And you may not know it, but it has been said, and I repeat it in my book, be as kind as possible to the people you encounter in the daily life that you lead, because you never know what kind of battle they may be fighting.
I'm gonna add that you should apply that to yourself.
I think it's good advice, and I'll take it.
I mean, because we need to be kind to ourselves, because oftentimes we are unaware of the battles that we're waging internally too. I mean, that's...
It's a really good point that you make, because I never feel like the expert that's out of the picture making judgments and interventions with people who are inside the picture. I'm inside the picture. I'm part of humanity. I'm subject to all the same issues that everybody else feels. And that's why in this gift of adversity, I've openly talked about some of the things that have happened to me, sometimes my own fault. Because I want to promote a conversation that says, all of us have bad things happening to us. We do not need to project a veneer of perfection. It's not necessary. We're human. Bad things happen, but let's learn from them. That's all.
Now, I know that